Happy Monday, everyone. It's Nile, the brain of the mainframe, here with Crowdfunding Comics, and we're here for another exciting episode 86, Mr. Tucci. How are you, bro?
I am terrific. Sorry about the delay, folks. It's all my fault. Had to switch back to my Apple computer because the PC is just...
the JPC is failing you, bro.
JPC is failing miserably, but we're going to throw another $300 at it, so hopefully that'll rectify that. But nonetheless, what are you going to do? Water under the bridge. But our 86th episode.
86th
How about
episode,
that?
Man. We're almost to 100.
Closing in on 100. 14 shows away from 100. And today we have one of our favorite guests, someone who we're both huge fans of.
Yes.
He's been, whether he knows it or not, he's been a mentor to many a comic creator. He is a legendary editor, working on, such titles as Spider-Man, and then he's also wrote, Dark
Hawk.
Dark Hawk.
All 50 issues.
I know. And he's worked on so many things from Fantastic Four, Iron Man. He's a professor at New York University. Mm-hmm. He's done symposiums at the Museum of Comic and Cartoon Art. He's written books, Superman on the Couch, What Superheroes Really Tell Us About Ourselves and Our Society. My God. Disguised as Clark Kent, Jews, Comics, and the Creation of the Superhero, that should be reading for everyone who's interested in comic books to know the true history of comics. And he's worked with the great Roy Thomas, the Stan Lee universe, by our friends at Tomorrow's Press, who put out those amazing books. Mm-hmm. But without further ado, if we may, and we'll let him run with it, could we please bring on our guest?
Yes, we have an amazing guest tonight, and we have a friend of the show, guest hosting with us. So without further ado, let's welcome our special guest, Mr. Danny Fingeroth, and our special guest host, Mr. Graham Nolan. How are you gentlemen doing tonight?
Okay, how are you? Great to be here.
Boys.
Oh man, this is fantastic.
Look at this. Look at all our heads in boxes. This is
just a bunch of boxes hanging out and chatting.
Well, sir, we have brought you here because you are the author of the wonderful, the amazing story of Stan Lee, A Marvelous Life, which is like the end-all biography of, as you write in there, the most famous comic creator of all time. And I'm happy to say that I have my copy here that I was able to purchase from you, and you signed it to me.
And I appreciate you purchasing it. Graham Nolan has paid his own cash money for it too. So
yes,
right away it's a good night for me,
And I love the your title page here, and it just says A Marvelous Life, and you wrote to Billy, who showed us all how to do it.
Wow.
Danny Fingeroth, not me, but them, Stan. So this is wonderful. An amazing book, huge book. And you know what's great, Graham? One of the things I look at, how cool is it with a biography when you have a bibliography in the back of a biography?
I've been checking it out, too.
I know.
I just figured when you're talking about Stan, you got to be careful, and you got to cite everything. There's so many legends and myths and half-truths and misunderstood stuff that I just figured, it's not an academic book. I made it to read like a novel, but a lot of endnotes because I just wanted to be, I wanted people to know that I wasn't making stuff up, or at least not too much.
What's that famous line from the man who shot Liberty Valance? When the legend becomes fact, print the legend.
The problem is, of course, that with Stan, for every event, there's 10 different legends. So even then, you got to pick the right legend, or
that's true.
Pick the better one.
Yeah. It's kind of like making a comic book,
That is true. Well, Danny, if you wouldn't mind, and before we get into the book, your wonderful book, could you tell the audience out there a little bit about yourself? Where you grew up, how you got into comics?
Well, I started at comics in 1977, so I was about 5 years old when I started. Yeah. It's a very young intern at Marvel. I'm the baby boom generation. I'm the okay boomer guy. Sorry, but that's So I was at ground zero, for the Marvel Revolution. I was that kid who looked at those comics and just like a thing went right into my brain. And that was, and I was the perfect audience. I had been reading comics for a few years. Of course, if you like superheroes, then the DC comics were pretty much the main option. There were the Archie superheroes and a few others. But suddenly this new Marvel thing came along. I got in late. It was Fantastic Four #4, so I missed some of the action. And so that was an obsession of mine as a kid. And I grew up in New York, where I had my choice of whether to buy my comics at the local newsstand or at the candy store. It really depended on which guy cut the wire on the magazines first and put them on the stands. That's where my loyalty would go. And that was a big ethical question for me at a certain point in my childhood. It's like, well, this guy is really treating me well, but that guy put the comics out first. So I went to college. I got a degree in filmmaking from Binghamton University, which had a terrific film program that was completely non-commercial. So it was a great education, but kind of like being an English major, which is ironically sort of the life I've circled back to now with this writing and stuff. I came back to New York, which is where I was from. And I'd been following comics, more of the undergrounds, the Harvey Pekar stuff. The superheroes were kind of in the background, but I thought, it might be interesting. It might be fun to work at Marvel Comics for a few months. And I knew somebody who got me in the door for an informational tour, and I ended up, through that, getting a job as Larry Lieber's assistant in the British department. So this is in 1977. And we were putting out stuff like Captain Britain, a lot of reprint material, Mighty World of Marvel, and I did that for a couple of years. And then a guy named Des Skin came along. I heard of Des. And Des convinced Marvel, you're putting out comics in Britain. Perhaps having at least one actual British person involved might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Because mainly the people making the British comics were like from Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, Queens. There was nobody actually British who was making them. Although I guess Queens County could be considered something of a British
quite
leftover. So anyway, so Dad moved out there. I was kept on. It's probably more detail than you want, huh?
No.
I was kept on as a shared assistant between Jim Shooter and Sal Brodsky, which was interesting because they didn't have the best relationship. So I was kind of a shared assistant between these two guys. I learned a lot of stuff. I learned a lot working with Larry in the year and a half I worked with him. That's when I did all those reprint titles that I, squeezed my name onto the front pages of. And I was doing a lot of Star Wars. Star Wars was being used at twice the rate in England as it was. It was so popular. It was the beginning of Star Wars. And the comics were so popular, they were using them at twice the rate in England. So I, in effect, became the assistant editor to Archie Goodwin on Star Wars. And that was that whole period. But I especially remember working with Carmine Infantino, who was one of my idols as a kid, Adam Strange and The Flash. And all that other, Detective Chimp, all that other great stuff that Carmine did. And that was really like my first kind of big lesson in being a professional was around that period, because it's like you're on the phone with your childhood idol, and you're going, "Oh, childhood idol, I'm so thrilled to be talking to you, and it's such an honor, and I can't ever begin to thank you for how much you meant to my childhood. Now, where are the goddamn pages?" It's a very odd kind of relationship to have with your childhood idol. Not that Carmine was ever late. I mean, he was actually, but just that's how oh yeah, this is no longer a hobby or even an obsession. It's like something I'm doing for a living. And so I did and then I ended up. When Louise Jones, now Louise Simonson, came over from Warren Comics, I became her assistant on the X-Men and Man-Thing and the Conan books and the Star Trek and the Star Wars and the Micro... editors work, every editorial office had like 15 titles. So I was her assistant on that, and on my own I edited King Conan and Khazar and Man Thing. So I kind of worked my way through the ranks at Marvel, and that's when I started writing Dazzler. I'd been editing it, and then I had, again, an early editorial crisis. Um, Tom DeFalco, who's one of my closest pals these days, back then he was writing it, I was editing it. We had a creative difference argument, and he left the book, and I was figuring, well, that was my first big editorial problem, and I totally blew it. So I get a call at home from Jim Shooter, which I imagined was the call to fire me. And instead he said, how would you like to write Dazzler, and I'll edit it? And I said, okay. So that's where the writing started coming into my career. And then maybe about a year after that, I got promoted. The Spider-Man books came open, and I became the editor of the Spidey books for that first period where I had them in the 80s. Then I went freelance for several years because I just wanted to see what that was like. And I just turned 30, and I thought, oh my God, I'm so old. I'm 30. Now, when am I ever going to do it? So I did a lot of different freelance writing and editing, all under contract for Marvel. And that's when I did Sci-Force, and I edited the Marvel Saga, working with Peter Sanderson. I did a lot, I wrote a lot of annuals, a lot of kind of one-offs here and there. And then for different reasons, I always had a standing offer from Shooter and then also from Tom DeFalco, when he became chief, to come back anytime there was an opening. Mm-hmm. So it made sense for me to do it in 1989, which is only 31 years ago. And so that's when I came back for my second phase. I became the Spider-Man group editor when the Spider-Man group, like the X-Men group, grew to be like 17 or 18 comics a month. And that's when we did Maximum Carnage and, dare I say it, the Clone Saga and Peter Parker's parents returning. And the Clone Saga, which we can talk about, and probably. But
was that your fault? I mean, your idea?
You mean the storyline that raised Spider-Man sales and all the rest of the industry was going down in sales? Yes, I'm the one who greenlit that.
Outstanding.
And then there was a big corporate shakeup at Marvel in the Ronald Perlman era. It was known as the Marvolution, which has since come to be kind of used ironically in retrospect. And I didn't get fired. I got restructured, which is as painful as it sounds. And so I had Marvel overnight became a very unpleasant place. And I was offered a job by Byron Price, starting up a line of digital comics, this was in 1995, which I can't believe was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But that's when the internet and digital comics was so new. The company was called Virtual Comics. And I brought over a bunch of my playmates from Marvel, Louise and Fabian Nicieza and Greg Wright, Jimmy Palmiotti, Ron Lim, and we put together a line of course, Stan Lee also did some comics for Byron, something called Stan Lee's Rift World, some novels, and of course, I'd worked with Stan at Marvel and as his editor. We can talk about that when we talk about the book at various points. But anyway, so Byron Price for a couple of years, and a few other internet startups. I think notably something called Visionary Media, which was created and run by a guy named David Williams. It's something called World Girl, which was popular for a while on Showtime's website. Mm-hmm. And there was a guy named Buzz Potamkin involved with that, who's not famous, but he was very influential. He was the producer and executive behind I Want My MTV and the Powerpuff Girls. He'd run TV at Hanna-Barbera. So it was a very, so that was actually a pretty good business model but it went the way of a lot of pretty good business models in that first internet implosion in the 2000s. And then so since then, I've been on this sort of self-invented road of teaching, writing, packaging, being a professional expert, and and so that's also all this sort of culminated and led to the Stanley biography.
Oh, very cool. Let me ask you a question though. I was a fan of Darkhawk growing up, and you wrote the whole series.
Every single issue, my friend, and all 3 annuals.
Yes, I mean I enjoyed it. I mean, how did you get involved with working on Darkhawk?
It's sort of another kind of I was around the office. Let me back up a little. Right before the crazy explosion of titles in the mid '90s, Marvel had a pretty rational plan that I think Tom and the late Mark Gruenwald and probably Mike Hobson was involved, who was the executive VP of publishing. The plan was, we'll put out a new title every month. So it'll be like 12 new titles a year. And probably half of them will succeed and half won't. And we'll grow the line in kind of a sane, controlled, rational way. Well, lots of luck with that. But part of that, because the comics, as we have learned, does not work that way. But when that was working, Dark Hawk was one of the premises that Tom really came up with. And at one point, it was thought I was going to edit it, and then a team I thought I was going to put together didn't work, and so Tom suggested, "Why don't you write it?" And I was looking for a series to write, and again, in those days, it was not only okay for editors to freelance; it was encouraged editors to freelance. So I worked with it from Tom's pretty bare bones, like 3 or 4 page outline. I kind of put a lot of meat on the bones and a lot of the various details, and rang some changes on what Tom had laid out. And then I worked with editors including Howard Mackey and Greg Graff, and the book, and of course Mike Manley designed the character and was the artist of the first 25 issues. So it was, the aim was always for it to be Spider-Man for the 90s. Mm-hmm. When the 90s were not ancient history, but the 90s were just starting.
Right.
I love the 90s.
We'd had Spider-Man, Nova, Speedball. And so
I love Speedball.
Everybody loves Speedball.
Speedball's great.
If you have
Geist.
if you have to name a character after a drug, then that would be the song to do. But it's also
really got us going.
After a pen nib too, so that no, all those characters were great. And I even did a mini series, if you remember, a few years later, teaming all 4 of those characters up. It was called Spider-Man Friends and Enemies. It was me and Ron and Mark McKenna did the inking. So it was fun to be. The idea was that every generation needs its own Peter Parker. That, even if Marvel time is slower than regular time, and so Peter Parker is only 23 or 24, well, he's still twice as old as a lot of the readers. Yep. So how do you get a kid who's a teenager and experiencing these powers? And of course, the challenge is, how do you make it similar to Spider-Man, but different from Spider-Man? What makes the character different? What makes this person, his background, his supporting cast? It was fun to do, and it was the grim and gritty era, so I probably had him, say or intimate, things that maybe a more violent or psycho character would. But really, he was this kid, Chris Powell from Queens, like Peter Parker had been.
That's crazy. I love that, man. That's great. I
have the first couple of issues. I know.
I have them all.
Really?
I have them all in the vault over there.
Well, of course.
That's what I call them. I call them the vault.
Signed.
I know. And speaking of signed, a couple of viewers were asking, how are they able to purchase A Marvelous Life autographed by you?
Well, if you're in the New York area, I will be doing a signing this coming Wednesday night, the 15th, from 6 to 8. Oh my God, it's like magic at the JHU comic book store on I think it's 481 Third Avenue. It's Third Avenue between 32nd and 33rd. And then a week from Wednesday, on January 22nd, I will be signing them at the JHU Comics in Staten Island, also 6 to 8. So if you want to come to either of those places, come on by. I'll probably be doing the Big Apple show in April, so you can come by there. And I'm actually looking for venues to sign and talk. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, can I give Danny at DannyFingeroth.com? Not so hard to remember. Or I'm all over Facebook, or talk to these guys. But that would be the easiest way at this point.
Mm-hmm. Right,
I think I also did go to I went by the Barnes and Noble on Broadway and 82nd Street a couple of weeks ago, and I signed all the ones they had there. So I'm assuming they're gone. If there are any left. I asked permission first. I didn't just go.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Did you just go in and just start taking them off and signing them, or did you?
I asked permission, but they didn't ask me for ID or anything. I could have just let me go sign these.
That's hilarious. So is that so you just went in there and you signed all the books and just put them back on the shelf?
Yeah, authors do that,
Stan Lee, though.
Right, I signed them Stan Lee.
Right.
Exactly. I predated them. No, authors, very famous authors, and me go to bookstores, and if their books are not face out on the bookshelves, there's like a famous story, I think, of like Kurt Vonnegut ran into Philip Roth in a bookstore, and they both were doing the same thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Reorganizing their books?
Yeah, just so that the covers will be face out.
That makes sense, man. That makes sense to me. I would totally do that. It's got to stand out, got to sell. TJ James says it sounds like a Terrificon appointment. Terrificon, oh, that's here in Connecticut.
Yeah, do you do Terrificon, Danny?
What is that?
Do you do the Terrificon?
I have done it in the past. I'm trying to work out something with that this year, too.
Oh, excellent.
So, yes, please feel free to...
I'll put a bug in Mitch's ear. Hey.
Yeah, but I have done that.
Danny and Graham back.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm due back, Mitch.
Yeah, TUCCI'S coming back, so...
We'll hit the cigar bar, some slot machines, huh? Oh, and then remember there's a convention.
Yeah, it's back there. No, I see they have a great lineup.
Yeah.
And I'll probably get San Diego this year, too, because for the book. And, another thing I do is I work with the Will Eisner Studios and the Will Eisner Foundation. I run something called Will Eisner Week, which is actually coming up the first week in March, although we're pretty flexible with defining week. So there's been Will Eisner Week events in February into April. But generally, Will's birthday would have been March 6th. So we have events all over the country. This year, so my main job as the chair of Will Eisner Week is to get on the email and the phone and nag people at various stores, colleges, libraries, anywhere and everywhere that will do some event either about Will or just branded as Will Eisner, something to do with comics and graphic novels.
That's wonderful. We have to do that on our show. It's cool. Will Eisner episode for Will Eisner Week. Nile?
Do we know anyone that's like knows a lot about him?
Well, it just happened. I know a little bit, and I know some people who know a little bit, so I think we could probably arrange something. Yeah, and the thing that I'm doing in New York is on March 3rd at Parsons. A guy named Ben Catcher, who's an independent cartoonist and a really great guy. He's also a teacher at Parsons. This is like the best kept secret in comics. But pretty much every Tuesday night, he has some awesome comics-related event, usually more independent, graphic novel-oriented, at Parsons. It's free, and it's in New York's lovely Greenwich Village. And so on March 3rd, I'm going to be talking with John Lind, who was the designer and editor of that deluxe Contract with God volume that came out a couple of years ago, or maybe last year. So John is going to give a talk, and I'm going to moderate about how he put that together. the thing, if any of you saw that Eisner exhibition at the Scott Eater Gallery a few years ago, you'd know that something I was amazed by, which is that Will did Contract with God. He penciled it, and then he lettered and inked it on vellum. So the pencils and the inks for Contract with God exist.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
wow.
And it's done not that much bigger than the printed book. So John Lind has made a book where taking a lot of the pencil pages side by side. It's a lot more than that. I mean, it's a lot of text and a lot of explanatory stuff, but it's really, if you're an Eisner fan, it's really a gold mine.
I wonder why he chose to do it that way.
That's a good question because for most artists, it's harder to ink on vellum, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also more work. I mean, you gotta cut it and tape it down and make sure it stays in place. And it seems like it could be an extra, headache.
My guess would be the book might explain that, but and that's if you come to the event or if you don't know, I will definitely ask John that. It's a perfectly, maybe because it was Will's first really big thing since. I mean, Will had been active all those years doing, his PS magazine.
Yeah.
With instructional stuff for the Army and a lot of corporate stuff, and his strange books like Will Eisner's Guide to Talking to Your Plants and Eisner's Heart. I mean, Will did a lot of different stuff, but maybe because this was going to be the first super serious thing he did, maybe he just wanted to be sure that he wouldn't screw it up, so doing it on, I mean, I know it's highly unlikely, even something Will Eisner screwed up would be better than 99% of people would do.
Exactly.
So this Will Eisner week, we went from having literally one or two events in New York 10 years ago, where I don't know if anybody remembers, I did an event at the old Hanley's on 33rd Street, where I managed to find Will's best friend from high school. So I did a panel with him and Denny O'Neill and a guy named Chris Couch. Maybe one or two other people, and it was pretty amazing. And after that, the Carl and Nancy Gropper, who run the Eisner estate and studio, they asked me to come help them with this thing called Will Eisner Week, and we grew it, largely through just my nagging abilities. This year we're closing in on 150 events. So
wow.
They're not all big. A lot of them are in classrooms, but some of them are big, like this thing at Parsons, different bookstores, different universities. So, and there's still time. If you, wherever you live, want to do a Will Eisner Week event, you can go to the Will Eisner website, or again, Danny at DannyFingeroth.com. Let me know. If you love Will and want to let people know it, or love comics and just want to sort of attach Will's name to some event, we are glad to help you out with that.
Oh,
we have to do something, boys, for sure.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Let's do it.
That'd be a lot of fun. And even if we just do our show, that's, we have a big outreach, so talk about Will Eisner, because a lot of people don't know who Will Eisner is. As you wrote in the book, that Stan Lee is the most famous comic creator in the world, thanks primarily to the films, and just he was the face of Marvel Comics, for so long, and even after he was no longer technically with Marvel Comics. And it's but Will, the influence Will had.
Oh, so there's a ton of people. Certainly when I say that about Stan, I don't mean to imply there are not other important people in comics. Obviously not, but he's the most famous. But Will was so influential, and they both went to DeWitt Clinton High School.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When did Eisner pass though? What year did he pass?
How long ago was it? 2005.
2005. Okay.
Yeah, it's
been 15. Yeah, 15 years.
Wow.
Time flies, man.
Yeah.
I got to meet him once, and Dennis Kitchen introduced me to him. And he was at San Diego, of all places, and he was just a sweetheart, and he was just so nice. And my wife and I, and he was just talking to us, and like, oh my God, and she doesn't know anybody, She knows names and stuff, but but she's also the one that I met Stan through her, because her and Joan were getting food on the lunch line, at San Diego at the concession stand. This is '94,
right?
And my wife is just online with this woman. They're talking about dogs, and they had Dobermans, and we had a Doberman. And all of a sudden, I see my wife coming up with Stan Lee. Oh, these are my new friends. And I'm like, well,
Do you know this guy, Billy?
Yeah.
She didn't have all that baggage. She wasn't intimidated.
Yeah, pretty much.
I think he likes comics.
I had an interesting meeting with Will Eisner. When I was at the Kubert School in the early 80s, a bunch of us went to the city to the School of Visual Arts because Will had a display of the painted covers he did for the Spirit for Warren magazine. So he had all those really great painted covers on display there. So we went in there to check him out and everything. And who walks in but Will Eisner? He was really cool. You know, he came up to us. You know, we told him we're, you know, studying to be artists and all that kind of stuff. He was really, really, really cool guy. It was really great to see the original artwork too.
Well, you know, Will, I mean, like Stan, but Will, he didn't get stuck in his ways. He was always curious about what young people were doing. He was curious about what was going on in comics and in the wider world. And he never lost, you know what I mean? There's a lot of people whose work we admire. And yet at a certain point, their work kind of froze in a certain formula. Well, this worked for me for the past 40 years. I'm going to keep drawing or writing this way. And
Sure.
Will didn't do that. Will really wanted to explore new boundaries and new subjects. You know, I mean, a thing he and Stan had in common was, you know, maybe people were saying this, you know, at the lunch, you know, at lunch with their friends, but these were guys who said for publication that comics could be an art form, that it wasn't just, you know, entertainment for morons, that it was, oh my God, this has potential to be as important as painting, movies, music, you know, and not everybody would say that, certainly not for publication, certainly not with so many people, you know, dismissing comics and how little respect comics got in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was a wonderful teacher too. He really was.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of good videos on YouTube, like lectures and stuff that he did, and even a couple drawing sessions. It's just cool. I watched a lot of it. I don't know if it's Amazon Prime had a biography on him, and I watched that, but now it's not available. I actually went to watch the other day. I was just because I saw the spirit, you know. I was organizing in my studio here, setting up my library area and other stuff, and I pulled some things out, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna put that on, and I can't access it anymore. But so that's when I went on to YouTube, and there's a whole boatload of great videos of him talking and stuff, and I just let him play and play. It's just so inspirational, you know. Eisner, Kubert.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was just naming off. I mean, even Kubert. There's so many great videos on YouTube, just him like talking, and I mean, that's where they live on forever now.
There's a couple of great documentaries about Will. One is by John Cook and oh crap, I'm blanking on his brother's name. John and the Cook brothers. Anyway, called Will Eisner: Portrait of a Sequential Artist.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another one by a woman from South America, Will Eisner: Profession Cartoonist. They're both terrific. And the Cook brothers one, if you get the DVD, you know, maybe some of this you can find on YouTube. It actually has the audio tapes of Will's interviews with artists like Kirby and Miller that ended up in that book Shop Talk.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah. Originally in the magazine.
Interviews. And a couple of excellent biographies of Will, one by Michael Schumacher, one by Bob Endelman. And this I haven't seen this on YouTube. In the early 90s, Stan did a series of videotapes called Stanley Presents the Comic Book Greats.
Yeah.
It's on YouTube. It's on YouTube.
The Eisner one's the only one I couldn't find on YouTube. Maybe it is. You can get them. I think Heritage Auction sells them, not at auction prices. They just happen to be the company that they're available through. And there's one they're all interesting, but the one of Stan and Will is really something to see the two of them. Mm-hmm. You know, Stan is the interviewer moderator, and the focus is on Will, but you can see they're old friends, and it's very. Yeah. It's very inspiring to see that video, especially.
I think the Stan Lee and Bob Kane one is a riot.
It is a riot.
Because I mean, you know, I've never seen Stan get steamrolled before. Bob Kane steamrolls him.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't. Stan gets some shots in there.
Yeah. He does. Yeah, but I mean, he's the host, so he's being He got his gracious hat on and everything, but I thought that
they
one
probably
was
ended filming. He probably walked away. You son of a bitch.
The way than the Eisner one is,
Yeah. All those videos are great though. If anyone, I don't know if they have, if you go on YouTube and look these up, he also did the videos where he had like Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, all those guys on, and I loved it because he's like basically like like making fun of them as they're drawing and stuff. He's like, why does he need so much stuff on him? Why can't you draw him simple? What's all this bulky crap you're putting on these guys? And they're just like, no, Stan,
more pouches.
More pouches and more guns and spikes. And he's like, geez, I remember when we just put on a suit, a one-piece suit.
That's part of the same series of videos.
I don't know. Yeah, or it's definitely in the same time period, I would say.
Yeah, no, they're all part of the same show.
Oh, okay, excellent. So good though. That's so much fun. But let's get into it now. Let's get into the book and how.
If we can, if I may, Danny, you went from going to school for filmmaking, then you got into working as I guess an internship or being an assistant for Larry Lieber, and then you got into editing. Then you went to writing comics. Then you went on your little adventures. What led you to actually start writing books? And of your novels and things like that to become an author, and how daunting was that to like, okay, here I go.
Well, the irony of my life is that I was on a course to be an English major. I had sort of all the ingredients for being an English major, good and bad. And I was in college. I was creative. I did a lot of creative writing. I was on the editorial board of my high school literary magazine. It was Bronx Science, so the magazine was called Dynamo. Pretty clever, huh? And so I'd always been writing. And I was one of those kids who'd go to the bookstore and I'd look on I figured out early on that my novels would go between Faulkner and Fitzgerald. Doesn't everybody do that?
Yeah.
So, but I also, when I was like 18, I was in college at the Boston University, and don't ask me how I got there. I'm not sure, but I just said, I'm an English major. I'm going to spend all my life, with based on secondhand experience from books and movies, and it wasn't the 60s anymore. It was the early 70s, but it was still sort of, I gotta have a real life. I cannot be cloistered. And so I dropped out of school and did a lot of hitchhiking and a lot of, not too crazy stuff, but some crazy stuff. And then ended up, becoming a film major. But so it's ironic to me that kind of, I tried so diligently for years to avoid my fate as an English major, and now I'm writing books with endnotes and stuff, But so I got finished with my various internet startup ventures, and I also did along the way a magazine called Right Now magazine for Tomorrow's, which was, it was kind of like Mike Manley's Draw. It was kind of like Writer's Digest for comics. I had a lot of interviews with writers and editors and a lot of nuts and bolts how-to. That was part of the mix. But at a certain point, and I kind of co-written a couple of novels for Byron. There were these Spider-Man novels. I worked on this trilogy with Eric Fine and Pierce Askergren, and done some short stories. And then I started doing some writing reviews and articles for some websites and some magazines. But a lot of things go back to my high school, honestly. But I went to a reunion, and a friend of mine who was an editor at Continuum Publishing, which is now Bloomsbury, part of Bloomsbury, he said, you got any ideas for books about comics? You're an expert in comics, and I'm an editor. And so I pitched him half a dozen ideas, and the one that he liked was Superman on the Couch. And so that was really my start as somebody who writes books, quote unquote serious books. I mean, I've also done a lot of books for kids and YA books. You may not be familiar with my biography of the kid who played Harry. I'm blank. Some people
Daniel
who
Radcliffe?
still, huh?
Daniel Radcliffe?
Radcliffe, no, Tobey Maguire. The one of Tobey Maguire and one of it'll come to me anyway. I did those, but I never had to leave my house. Those were like so elementary and so for kid oriented that I really could just. It was scary how much it was about these people on the internet. But the first real, real book I would say was Superman on the Couch. Um, and the premise was here's a guy who knows how the sausages are made. Here's somebody from the comic business who's not an academic, who's not a literary critic, who's not, God forbid, an English major. Somebody who actually knew what went into comics. And bring some insight to it. And that's I think the thing I bring to anything I write is having a critical mind and a critical eye and a lot of the same skills that I think I brought to editing and writing comics. Right, editing and writing comics, like writing stories about anything, about bringing, some understanding of human nature and what makes people tick and what motivates people and what makes somebody a good guy or a bad guy or some, degree of combination of them, which is what Marvel excelled at, bringing you nuanced characters. And so we thought a lot more than you might think at Marvel about motivation and personality and what in somebody's background leads and so it was in its way kind of a lot of working at Marvel and doing comics is about psychology. And I had my own experiences over the years with psychology and psychologists and so I thought, well, how do I take a look at these characters and what makes them tick and what makes the people who created them tick and what makes the people who read them. And so that the book was sort of a combination. It was as much sociology as psychology. And that sort of led to, me teaching at all these various institutions over the years and running the education department at the old Museum of Comic and Cartoon Art. And then a thing I've become known for, which I never would have thought, because as a kid and even until relatively recently, I was pretty I didn't love being on stage, but just through teaching and through doing events and conventions, I got much more at ease with doing panels and presentations. And I guess the height of it was those 4 years I worked with the Wizard World convention chain. I spent 4 years as a vaudevillian with them. I mean, doing like 8 to 15 panels at every Wizard show, including being Stan's moderator at a lot of them. Mm. And so I learned, and so it was very flattering. I don't think any convention has ever really had a job like I had before or since, which was do the Danny Fingeroth slate of panels. So, I would do here's the famous artist, let's talk to this guy. But then I would also do, we're in Louisville, Kentucky. What's here? Oh, the Louisville Slugger Company. And what do they have? The Louisville Slugger Museum. Oh, I'll bring in the curator of the Louisville Slugger Museum to talk about baseball and comics. So I got to do all sorts of wacky stuff like that. So all these different things added to my personal network, to my experience, to my understanding of creative people and business people. And so all that informed the books. And that was the beginning of the Odyssey. And I think when I wrote that first book, I mean, despite having been in comics my entire adult life, I think I still took a lot of the mythology at face value. You just sort of hear these stories or read them and you go, and I feel like idiotically naive because, they were fine for Superman on the Couch. I got, but as I interviewed people and I got to know, and a lot of things, I did a series of interviews at what's called the Yivo Institute, which is like a Jewish place in New York, dealing with Yiddish culture and kind of Jewish immigrant culture. And so I and that was through a weird series of only New York coincidences, but I found myself doing 3 different nights of something called Comics and the Jewish American Dream, one night with Jules Pfeiffer, one night with Al Jaffe, one night with Harvey Pekar. Holy
wow, what a lineup.
And, so you do stuff like that and you go, oh, there's more of this history than just what's in this, this book here, so you find all these different layers. And then through writing Disguised as Clark Kent, which was my kind of deep drill down on Jews and the creation of the superhero, I had the honor, thanks to modern medical science, I got to interview guys who, in an earlier era, I wouldn't have because they would have been dead. Because I was interviewing a lot of guys in their 80s and 90s, Jerry Robinson, Irwin Hazen, Arnold Drake. And so all these guys, you hear this history and you go, oh, yeah, it's just like high school. There's all these cliques. Everybody hates everybody else. All these things happened in totally not the idealized way. And yet, these people who might have hated each other put out these great friggin' comics together.
Yeah.
So I think my appreciation and understanding of history got a lot more into the nuances and subtleties of it. And I mean, when I say it's like high school, I mean, the guys who started Mad Magazine literally went to high school together.
Wow.
Jaffe, Kurtzman, Feldstein, John Severin, a couple of others, they all went to High School of Music and Art. The same DeWitt Clinton. I mean, if you Google DeWitt Clinton and their alumni list, of course, it's incredible comics. But I mean, the whole culture, people who became influential for decades in the whole culture, and and just getting older myself. But so I think these books, I don't want to use the W word, but if there's any wisdom that I have, I tried to put in these books. And I think the book about Stan is really kind of the, because Stan is so much typical of his generation, right? A lot of guys entered comics when he did, and yet, of course, the sui generis. This is a phrase I had a lot of trouble with in the audiobook. I have no idea how to really say it, but I'm saying it's sui generis. There was nobody like Stan. He was, right? Yeah. He was typical of his generation, and yet, of course, it's like Bob Dylan. It was another obsession of mine. On the one hand, Bob Dylan was just another guy who showed up in Greenwich Village in 1961. On the other hand, he's Bob Dylan.
He's Bob Dylan, right? Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think Stan is almost a similar case. Such a similar background. Grows up poor in Manhattan, in Upper Manhattan, in the Bronx. Has a father who can't make a living. All these classic Greatest Generation and Depression era story, and yet he makes himself into this character, Stan Lee, and how that evolves is I found really fascinating to trace, because again, it's I would say that one of the things I'm most pleased about, the book has been very well reviewed, and it's been reviewed in the Times of London and NPR and Publishers Weekly and Psychology. It's the reviews have almost all been good, and even with the rare exceptions, because of course we do live in the internet world and Facebook world. No offense to anybody out there on the internet and Facebook, but with rare exceptions, even people who may not like Stan have kind of said they like the book, because I don't think it's a hagiography. I think it's overall a positive view of Stan, but there's certainly plenty of warts and blemishes in there, and testaments from people who he may not have treated so great, as well as people who loved him and loved working with him. But I think this journey I've been on, of embracing my fate as an English major, and something of a historian, hopefully I'll do more and better, but I think this, I cringe very little when I go back and read this book, which, as those of us who are involved in creative fields know, not cringing is often as good as it gets when you look at your own stuff.
Yeah. There's some stories in that book too. particularly because Stan was there pretty much from the beginning of things. I mean, he came in slightly later, but around 1941.
Late 40.
What's that?
Late 40.
Oh, late 40. Okay. Um, there's a great story in there because I always wondered. Simon and Kirby created Captain America, but they only did 10 issues. I always wondered why that was. Why did they only do 10 issues and move on to DC? And Danny has a great story in there. Do you want to tell that one, Danny?
Well, I mean, it's Stan was Martin Goodman's cousin by marriage, and I don't get the impression they were especially close. I think after Stan started working there, they developed a closer relationship. But Stan had graduated high school like a year and a half before. He'd had half a dozen jobs, none of which lasted more than a month or two. And I think his family just said, Martin, he's your problem now. Can you find him a job, keep him out of trouble? And Martin, palms him off on Simon and Kirby. Now, yeah, the context for this, of course, is that not only was Marvel Comics new, comics were new. I mean, if you look at, say maybe 1933 or 34 was when again, Bob Bierbaum and a lot of historians are doing a lot of really worthwhile digging into what the first comic was, but more or less comics that resemble what we know started in the early 30s. Then Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson started what will become DC Comics in like 34, 35. So Martin Goodman, who was a pulp publisher, starts publishing comics in 1939. So Stan comes in a year into that. So it's kind of, there's no traditions, there's no regular way things are done. Simon and Kirby. So Simon was the editor-in-chief, Kirby was the art director, and they had worked together on projects before, and there was still a lot of stuff being packaged by Funnies Inc. But Simon and Kirby came up with Captain America. And Simon handled the business end. And he had what must have been a verbal agreement, because if it was written, he would have had, I guess, a stronger case. But he agreed that to I think, a 25% share of royalties for him and Kirby from any profits Captain America made. Well, Martin Goodman, by all accounts, engaged in what has now come to be called Hollywood accounting. He took all the expenses from all the other comics, and maybe even from his magazines, but certainly from the comics, and put them against Captain America. So it made little or no profit. And I think, Simon must have suspected this, but I think one of Goodman's accountants confirmed that for him. So, again, for whatever reasons they had, instead of quitting, which I guess they had day jobs and freelance, they started doing freelance work for DC. And Stan was their assistant, and he followed them one day when they went out to their studio at lunch. And he swore he would never reveal their secret. And that he would never tell Goodman. The thing, again, Stan was related to Goodman, but so were half the people who worked there. Half the people who worked at Timely were named Goodman, literally.
Wow.
So at a certain point, Goodman found out. How he found out, nobody knows. And the legend goes that not him, Goodman himself stayed out of it, but Goodman's brothers and maybe one or two other people kind of confronted Simon and Kirby and basically said, "You're fired, but finish Captain America number 10. That seems like, even as I say it, it sounds too simple. There must have been other factors. So supposedly Kirby never stopped blaming Stan for quote unquote ratting them out. Simon believed Stan. Now, you guys in comics, and even you folks out there just watching, know what a gossip-driven business comics is. So the idea that Simon and Kirby could be doing pages for DC, handing them in, and nobody at DC would have said anything. Plus, within a month or two, the DC Comics would have said, "Simon and Kirby are here."
Sure.
So, that's the story. That Kirby blamed Stan. Simon did. One way or another, though, they were fired, and which resulted years later in, as copyrights came up, and I talk about this in the book, too, of Joe Simon suing Marvel and Kirby kind of being caught in the middle, and how everybody reacted in these situations. It was very, it's a fascinating, very human a story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought it was the takeaway for me was Martin Goodman, writing off the other bad selling books because Captain America was widely successful.
Right.
It was doing very, very well. It was their top selling book, and all of a sudden there's no royalties. And then they find out that all the crappy books that weren't making money were getting written off against it.
I don't know. And I mean, it had some good sellers. I think the Submariner book, but I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was very naive, even though Goodman, even though Simon was the more sophisticated financially of the Simon and Kirby team, even he didn't think to get anything in writing from Martin. And there's probably lines if we don't want to think about it too much, but how many things do you do on a handshake in life, and later on you go, why the hell did I do that? Why did I, even if the guy I'm dealing with is totally honorable, what if he gets hit by a truck? So it's
mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, comics are because so many of us love it so much, and would do it for free, and because a lot of us start so young, it's full of horror stories like that. Luckily, Simon and Kirby had somewhere to go, and they did have that one of the few brand names of talent back then.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bob Kane's father was either a lawyer or he was a businessman, and he had a contract written up for him when it came to the creation of Batman.
Okay, let me bust that myth. Okay,
what's that?
Let me burst that myth.
Okay,
Bob Kane's father. And again, this might just be another myth that I've heard. But
he was a peddler.
I believe it's more accurate that his father worked as an engraver at the Daily News, and he saw how much money the syndicated cartoonists were making. So maybe then he did get in touch with a lawyer or an accountant to protect his son.
Yeah.
But so it's more, it's not that Kane came from any particularly pampered background.
Right.
I think he was, well, if you're in New York, he was living near the Grand Concourse, but not on the Grand Concourse. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But he had a father that looked out for him.
He did, definitely.
And got him to get stuff down in writing, and he got himself a good contract that Scala and Schuster did not have.
That's true. Which is, it's funny because I think a lot of the superhero origins and a lot of both of the creators and the characters come from some demolished family where either your planet blows up or your or your parents are murdered outside the movies.
Right.
But I think I wouldn't, I know you said it kind of is almost a wisecrack, but I wouldn't discount it. I think that Kane had a family to look out for him that, I don't think Stan did, even though his father was alive. And Jerry Siegel's father died when Jerry was a teenager, and he had a secondhand clothing store in Cleveland, and he wasn't. The myth used to be that he was murdered during a robbery. It turns out he just had a heart attack during the robbery, but so it's the same effect. So I think Kane did have that advantage of that a lot of those guys did not have.
Mm-hmm.
So is Bob Kane from Cleveland as well?
No. Kane's
from New York.
Kane's from the Bronx. Also
okay. So
Siegel and Schuster went to the Cleveland equivalent of DeWitt Clinton High School. That was the famous Glenville High School.
Now, Stan goes, World War II happens, which, of course, Jack went to war, I think, and so did Will. And Stan joins the Army. Stan gets out of the Army, and he goes back to Timely.
Right.
And how does he become, then, from this intern type of, person following around, Jack Kirby, to coming home and then all of a sudden becoming, and not to ruin anything in the book because this is such an incredibly well-researched book and entertaining book, but if you can just give people a little things that they want to know, like how did Stan become Stan and take those reins and turn it from 1945 to 62 to become...
Well, he comes back from the army, and look, I think you're right. He didn't serve overseas. He served stateside. He did a lot of inspirational and educational and propaganda material. He wrote the famous VD Not Me poster. He did a lot of, but he was still. But I just go back. So Simon and Kirby leave probably sometime in late 1941. And Goodman says to Stan, "Can you hold the fort until I find a real grown-up?" And Stan does the job, I guess, for maybe about a year. He goes into the army in November 42. So let's say he's doing the job for a year and a half. His replacement that he picked, and I guess Martin had to approve it because Stan was still like 19, 20 years old, so, a cartoonist named Vince Fago. And Vince has two things that make him ideal for Stan. His specialty is funny animal books. He's not a superhero guy. He's not an action adventure or mystery or horror guy. He does funny animals, and he doesn't seem to be a guy who wants a full-time job. For long. He's willing to be. It seems like Fago is willing to be the substitute and still Stan work when he's in the army, and Stan is sending in scripts. He famously almost got arrested for breaking into his own mailbox on a Sunday or something because he had a deadline that he needed to see the pages for. Stan comes back from the army in 45, and the company has grown from just putting out a handful of titles. Now they've got all these titles, but the superheroes are starting to die out. So there's humor, and there's romance, and there's mystery, and crime comics, and horror comics. And Stan writes every genre. I think a couple of years he doesn't do much writing at all. A couple of years he's just editing. But then by about 47, he's back in the saddle writing, and Timely now is putting out, right, the great Marvel myth, right? It was the little engine that could. It was Stan and Jack and Steve and Sol and Flo, and they put out. Well, Marvel, it was called Timely and Atlas at various times, was putting out 75 to 80 titles a month.
Wow.
I mean, if not the largest and the second largest by volume. They were never known for being especially original, but basically everybody, if you go through the history of that era of comic creators, everybody worked for Stan at some point and everybody worked for Eisner at some point. Those guys had a lot of work. They just had a lot of people going through their offices. Jerry Robinson worked for Stan for 10 years. Al Jaffe worked for Stan for 10 years. People don't generally know that because obviously the best known work is at other companies.
Yeah.
They were really dependable guys who Stan could just let go off and write and draw and even edit. So Marvel grows. This is the big expansion in comics in the late 40s into the early 50s. And so Stan is very comfortable. He's got a big personality. People who remember him, even before it started appearing in the pages, he was just a very outgoing, charismatic guy. And so he supervised a lot of editors. Marvel actually had an in-house bullpen. There was a big rivalry between the quote-unquote serious artists who did the action-adventure stuff and the Bigfoot guys who did the cartoony stuff, like Millie the Model and all their set. I'm forgetting. My friend Irma. And the Imp, and there were anything that was like Ziggy Pig and Silly Seal, which Stan and Al Jaffe co-created. Those two immortal characters that Marvel actually just put out a comic. So they did all kinds of things. The heroes died out, and then in the 50s, again, has been married to Joan since 47. They have a daughter. They moved to the suburbs. He had a very nice lifestyle. He can assign himself as much freelance as he wants. People generally like him. I mean, I don't know if everybody liked him, but generally thought of as a well-liked guy. Um, and then things start changing in comics in the 50s, where Frederick Wortham and other anti-comics advocates start coming on with a full court press about how horrible comics are. And the EC comics are the ones that they really focus on, with the horror ones, the classic EC story being the one where there's some guy is killed and his revenge against somehow the people. This guy did something horrible, and as revenge, somebody kills him, and they make a baseball diamond with like his intestines as the baseline.
Yeah.
It is the paintball. So comics took a lot of heat, but oddly enough, Atlas benefited because they were financially secure enough that when all these other companies are going out of business, they picked up all these artists for really cheap. So they cut their rates, but and they were scared. They could feel the breath on their neck. But even then, they were putting out like 75, 80 titles a month and selling very well. And then Goodman, for various reasons, and even since the book has come out, I hear all sorts of other, something happened where Goodman, who had been doing his own distribution, decided to go with what he thought was a trustworthy company, a solid magazine distributor, that went bankrupt like several months later, and suddenly Goodman has no one to distribute him. And he goes hat in hand to DC Comics, which owned its own distribution arm called Independent. And because Goodman not only had the comics, he had a line of men's magazines that were kind of like gossip magazines and, quote unquote, true adventure. True adventures like Mario Puzo writing first-hand accounts of World War II battles that never happened, stuff like that. So, there were all those magazines with those great pulp covers and, minimal amount of actual fact or truth in them. So Goodman had that whole publishing empire, which IND wanted, and they let him keep those, but his comics, I think they felt he always flooded the market with that, plus comics were in this touchy spot in history with Wortham and so on. So they restricted him to 8 a month, and that's where the story of Marvel as a little engine that could happen. So Stan had ruled this empire of comics, and suddenly he's down to these 8 a month, which they made into 16 bi-monthlies. So there's a theory which kind of makes sense, which is rather than churning out 75 comics a month, most of which he could barely look at, or if he was writing them, just barely jot down the first thought, suddenly you're down to 8 comics a month. Well, you actually have time to focus and think about them. So there's a theory that that's part of why Marvel happened. And of course, Jack Kirby coming back and Ditko enter, all these different things, this perfect storm of these events and people happening kind of gave us, from this company that was, Stan called himself at that point the human pilot light, that Martin was keeping him there. He couldn't really fire him. He was his relative. Right. And I'm suddenly seeing all these things popping up, and Martin, I think Martin didn't want to let go of the comics fully because he wanted to, if comics did come back, to have a presence on the stands. But it was, there's another theory that Bruce J. Friedman, the novelist, who's Drew Friedman's father, if people know those names, he worked for Goodman for like 12 or 14 years as an editor of the men's magazines of Stag and True whatever. And he had an office right next to Stan's. And his theory was that Martin was trying to, kept giving Stan smaller and smaller offices and fewer support staff. Yeah. He thought that Martin was maybe trying to embarrass Stan into leaving, but Stan wouldn't take a hint. He didn't leave.
What would be a great what if is like if Marvel ever published, what if Joe Manili didn't die? Mm. What would Marvel Comics look like? Because he was Stan's go-to guy, before Jack came in.
yeah, that's one of those unknowables. I mean, I guess that would, because of course then I guess we'd really know what Stan brought and what Jack brought. But of course, then people would always go, Joe did it all.
No, yeah.
That's right.
I don't know. I mean, I think it was the unique chemistry of Stan and Jack and Steve, of course, and Larry. I don't want to forget Larry, who really wrote a lot of those early stories.
No doubt.
Scripted a lot of those early stories. That's a really, Manili was a hell of an artist and he was kind of like Kirby that way, very imaginative, very fast, very dramatic.
Any genre.
Yeah. Hard to know. I mean, really, of course the other big what if is, of course, and I guess we've had this conversation long enough where we get to this. Kirby had a big falling out with an editor named Jack Schiff at the DC, who he was in business with, doing a newspaper strip, and they had an argument over money, oddly enough, in comics. Go figure. And so Kirby, I think, although he didn't really want to, went back to Goodman and to Stan. I forget who. There's somebody who wisecracked. Who won the battle? Who won the battle between Jack Kirby and Jack Schiff? And the answer is Stan Lee.
Oh, yeah.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Now I have to ask, though, if you don't mind, Billy. I have to ask, with this book that you've written about Stan, I mean, was this in development before he passed, or is this something you took to the pages to after?
This was in development in my head for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I wrote the pitch maybe about 5 years ago, signed the contract about 3 years ago, and then really started focusing on it maybe about a year before he died. My editor was getting a little anxious about it, wondering where it was. And I was, so no, it was not something that just, I mean, obviously when he died, I did get a call from my editor going, hurry up.
Now, did you meet with Stan to fact check any of this stuff while you were writing?
I'd worked with Stan, of course, over the years at Marvel as his editor sometimes, which was bizarre and surreal and all that stuff. And I'd interviewed him a half dozen times, and I was his moderator at the Wizard shows. But I would say I did two. The book is unauthorized. It's not authorized by Marvel, by Stan's family, by POW, by anybody. It's and so. Which I feel is an advantage because it means that I'm telling the story the way I see it, But I did feel I wanted to let Stan know that I had signed it because I talked to him about it over the years, and said to me, "Good luck with it," and I'm not going to tell people to talk to you or not talk to you, but I'm not doing any interviews. Well, two interviews later. I'm not sure how I convinced him, or if either just his mood changed, or I would send him pictures. I live near where he grew up, and every once in a while I'd send him pictures of the George Washington Bridge. And here's the bridge at night. Here's the bridge in the fog. Here's the bridge at dawn. And he'd respond. Stan was the world's greatest email responder. You never had to wait more than an hour for a response because he didn't like anything hanging over his head. So, we go, those pictures bring back memories. So whatever it was, he agreed to a very lengthy interview and then to a very lengthy follow-up. And I think one thing I had learned over the years is how to interview Stan Lee. Because the fascinating thing about Stan, if you look at your YouTube videos of Stan from conventions or just anywhere, yes, 90% of what he says is boilerplate stuff that he says automatically.
Right.
But 10% of the stuff he says is mind-blowing personal revelations, but he says it the same tone of voice as if he was trying to sell you something.
Yeah.
Really got to listen, and I figured out how to listen, and I think I figured it out. So I going, so what about you and Jack? I know, well, there would be no point to that, right? But I was able to get him to talk about stuff that I think is different and more personal and more revelatory than many people have been able to, because I think he was comfortable with me and felt comfortable sharing things. So I think there's things in the book that I don't think you would have heard anywhere, but it did take me a long time, just you have to interview anybody, I think, of that level of celebrity.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much mythology involving famous people, so much mythology involving us and people and our friends. How do you cut through that and get to something resembling a true recollection or feeling or emotion? And I think I figured that out, and I was lucky to get 2 long interviews with Stan and with, I interviewed 50 or so people, from various aspects of Stan's life for the book.
Now, I got a question, because it's coming up. I've seen the question come up in the chat a few times so far since we've started the stream. And it's kind of what most people, I guess, talk about now regarding Stan, at least in general. I hear it a lot. What is your opinion of the last couple of years of his life?
Good question.
It's tragic, he was a rich, famous guy who outlived most of his protectors. And so he was surrounded by people, some of them maybe even well-intentioned, who did not always do so well by him. And I was friendly with Stan. I knew him a long time. We had a good relationship. I was not, though, a close personal friend. But I just could feel and sense, and you just sort of, it's not when somebody is like taking your blood and selling and putting it in ink that you're signing covers with and selling it as having authentic Stanley DNA, that's not a good thing,
Yeah.
Maybe if you're Kiss in 1976 it is, but not if you're like an elderly guy.
Yeah.
So all this, what I say in the book about it, and the other cases I think of, I'm sure there are many, but the ones that come to mind are Mickey Rooney had that kind of problem, and Groucho Marx. Is that if Stan represented for my generation, and maybe I'm not, maybe you guys are like a little later in the boom, or what, if Stan represented for baby boomers, kind of this uncle, or with it parent figure, when in the 60s and 70s. Well, now he represented this problem that a lot of people of our generation have, which is, what do we do with Dad? He's a symbol of this kind of guy who'd been so important and who was still going to. But that's the thing, I don't know if he should have been going to shows. Certainly not the last year. Probably he was probably. But you would see him at these shows, and even though he looked like he was about to collapse before going on stage, when he was on stage, the guy was having a great time. So, but the whole thing. His wife died about a year and a half before he did. One of his main lawyers, who was really a fierce protector, a guy named Arthur Lieberman, died several years before that. And I think these were, there were people who cared and looked out for him, but these were the fierce bulldogs watching out for Stan Lee in every sense of the word. And I just think when he was gone, it gave the opportunity for people, and I don't want to think that they were ill-intentioned. Maybe they thought they were somehow doing something good, but no, it's really painful, especially if you have elderly relatives of your own and you watch it. Clifford Meth, my hat's off to him for bringing people's attention to Stan and making. I know he did a lot of stuff behind the scenes. No, it was really, I guess a lesson to everybody. Get your wills in order and get all, have instructions, because it's, if we're lucky, if we get to that age,
Yeah. Now, do you think all those stories, though, were true at the time they were coming out? Like, AIDS showering with him and all this other stuff?
I think a lot of that stuff was not true.
Yeah.
I think those kind of accusations were, again, I don't have any special insider knowledge of this. Just seems to me those stories came and went so quickly that, and if you ever met Stan in his recent years, I would say he had a firm handshake, but I never really thought that there would be any problem. He was very frail in those last couple of years. The guy was not somebody who was going to be intimidating or a threat to anybody.
Forcing someone to do something they didn't want to do.
Yeah, exactly. Unless they were trying to. Like I said, most of those stories went away very quickly. So I mean, I don't know if that means somebody got paid off or scared off or just or got a real stern note from a lawyer. But yeah, I think those kind of stories, they seem, when people become elderly, who knows, but to me, they did not seem credible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you have? I mean, we have you almost an hour and a half now. Do you have a favorite Stan Lee story?
I have several, but the one I like to tell actually relates to his later years. We were doing a panel at the Wizard Show in Sacramento, and I think it was 2014. And Stan was supposed to be there on Saturday, but he didn't show up because they said, and I believe this was true, that he had a bad reaction to a flu shot.
Mm-hmm.
Which doesn't mean you shouldn't get your flu shots. He had a bad reaction to a flu shot and was feeling ill, but he came the next day. Wizard sent, I think, a plane to get him. And sure enough, Stan shows up, and I can see he's like holding onto the banister leading up to the steps to the stage. And the president of Wizard gets up and he says to the crowd, it's like 5,000 people in the room. He says, Stan feels terrible. He wasn't here yesterday, and so he came today. But he's not feeling well. He's had a bad reaction to a flu shot. So instead of the full 45-minute panel, we're only going to do 20 minutes. So I hope you understand. He's a real trooper. He loves you guys, but only 20 minutes. And now here's Stan and Danny. We come up, and we start, I ask him a few questions, and then he gets questions from the audience. And I'm getting hand signals from, the Wizard people and Stan's people, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, stop. And, 20 minutes. And I turn to Stan and I say, Stan, as John explained to everybody, you're not feeling that well, the flu shot, so, we're going to end it here. But is there anything you want to say to the folks before we go? And Stan looks at me and he says, is God talking to you? He said we have to stop. I feel great. Let's keep going. Everybody backstage and in front of the stage is flashing me signals. I have no idea what they mean. I'm supposed to get him off the stage, but he doesn't want to go. So that was it. We did about 10 minutes more finally, and then we finally got him off. But that's one of my favorite Stan stories.
That's amazing.
He's a trooper. That's great.
It's that stage adrenaline, man.
And also,
he loved it, though,
That happened to me, funnily enough, with Harvey Pekar, too. Harvey came to New York. It was about a year before he died. And you could see he wasn't feeling that well then. And then the late Seth Kushner, who, if you know his work, was a great photographer. But he's up close in Harvey's face taking flash pictures. You can see that great picture of Harvey online of sort of with a Wally-Wood lighting effect of Harvey. That was Seth. So I thought Harvey was going to faint before he even got on stage. He was having blood sugar, all sorts of issues.
Oh, geez.
We get on stage, and again, another guy, just here and this happens, I've seen this happen all the time with ill people or elderly people. You get them on a stage, and it recharges them in such a way.
The adrenaline takes over, and
Sure.
Doing what they love fills their soul again. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're right at it.
And just that love coming out of the audience.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Great.
You think we'll ever have this again? As someone to impact an industry the way he did?
I don't know. I mean, I think the closest we have, maybe Todd McFarlane. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if Todd wants it that as much as Stan did. I mean, what do you think? Is there anybody on the horizon?
I can't think of anybody.
Huh?
I can't think of anyone. Maybe Graham Nolan.
Well,
he doesn't want it either.
Yeah, no, I think, like you said, there's only one Stan Lee.
Yeah.
I mean, you could try to think, it's especially with that personality, and like you said, who wants it,
Right.
And is just so gregarious, and I mean, look at that, I know Marvel never did the first Comic-Con, But he would have those Marvel cons in the, Comic Cons in the '70s, and he'd be there running the room and everything like that, and with the mic, and they had their own Comic Con. I mean, it's astonishing.
I think ultimately he wanted to be in Hollywood, which is where he ended up. But I think he was in such a comfortable position, at Marvel, and had, anyway, it's a big move to make, and he finally did make it in 1980. But no, I don't know if there's anybody really a unique figure, because so many people know who he is who unfortunately don't know Will Eisner or don't know Archie Goodwin or Bob Kane, or Siegel and Schuster. Even there's nobody, because I think most people who do this kind of work tend to be introverted. Our natural state of being is not on stage. But I think Stan really loved acting. As a kid, he was in all these different amateur acting troupes, and he was in the WPA theater group and so on during the Depression. So he just loved any opportunity, and Marvel gave him that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, I always wonder that, because you look at guys like even like Walt Disney, right? And Stan Lee is my Walt Disney for comics, right. And it's like, can we ever have that again? It's been done, it's been pioneered. You're at a point, so it almost seems like it'd have to be a whole new medium, I guess, or really just someone to spark that energy, if not more, to, I think, truly create another icon. Like those gentlemen that pioneered certain things. Or even if they didn't pioneer them, they made their face bigger to come off as the pioneer.
I think there will be somebody, will come from where you don't expect it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, every decade, right? I mean, when I started in comics, the attitude at Marvel, and I'm only slightly exaggerating, was, well, this is an interesting folk art we've been involved with. Probably got another 2 or 3 years. Last one out, remember to turn the lights off. So that somebody like Frank Miller would come along.
Yeah, that's what Herrenberg said. Your boy Zach said that Frank Miller is the closest, but I don't think that.
No,
I don't think so.
Frank's introverted though too. I mean, he doesn't want that. He doesn't want that limelight, and
that's why I think Todd. Todd.
I would think Todd.
Todd's got to spend millions of dollars buying those baseballs, and oh, what a dope buying those baseballs for all that money. And it's like, he got however much he spent, he got that much in free publicity from it. So I think just like comics are dead. Oh, here's Frank Miller. Comics are dead. Oh, here's Todd McFarlane.
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody who you don't expect will come along. And figure out. Even with all the noise of the internet and 5 million different things competing for your attention, somebody will figure it out.
Yeah. Yep.
I think so.
I think I'll go with Billy, and I'm going to go with Graham Nolan.
I think so.
Probably, I think you're right. I'll go with Graham.
I'm going with Graham Nolan.
Way too low. I can tell you that.
Hashtag Graham Nolan. That's going to be the new thing. Hashtag Graham Nolan.
Graham and I had the honor of being on stage with Stan. Remember that?
Yeah.
With him and Alan Bellman and Jim Steranko. Danny, I don't know, were you there? Or was that the Rhode Island Comic Con?
I think I've seen the video of that, but I was not there. I was at the Rhode Island Comic Con this past iteration, but not that one.
Right, it was great, right?
Yeah, I went to that convention. I was like, hey, Billy, it's Nile. And you're like, who? And I was like, someday, my friend. Someday.
Feet off the stage.
Get off the stage, hobo.
Get off the stage, deadbeat. I dropped my gum, sir. Sorry.
Sir, I love it.
Sorry, sir. So, Danny, where can anyone out there that's looking to buy this book? Where is the book available?
Well, it is published by St. Martin's Press, which is a part of Macmillan. Hence, you can buy it everywhere. At the usual suspects online. There's a bunch of the stores. I think here's the website, the webpage for the publisher. So they have the usual suspects lined up. If you want to buy them at your local independent store or your local comic store, fine with me. But it's available everywhere. I literally just finished wrapping up the touch-ups on the audiobook today. That's supposed to be out on the 21st of this month. The large type is coming out next month. So you should not have any problem finding it. We gave it a nice big garish red cover so you can't miss it. You know, I learned my comic book lessons well.
Yeah, you did. Yes. You actually are reading the book for the.
I am.
For the audio. That's terrific.
I am. So if I'm available to read your book for audio too, if anybody
there you go.
I'm just gonna call you. Hey Dan, I'm on chapter 4, please. And I'll just sit there with my telephone.
Well, I did a book tour where I did a reading at which one? People were they came out in very nice sized crowds in L.A. and Berkeley and Seattle, Portland, and in far-flung Brooklyn, taking you away from your computer or your phone. If this is your idea of a good time, then there's an entire book now that you can get.
There you go.
How long does that process take? How long did it take to do the recording?
You know, it's tough to say because I think it took me about 7 6-hour days. It's a very interesting process that is not that interesting. It's interesting to do it, you know, because you read it and then either I or the director don't like it, so you go back and read the sentence. I would say the person who worked hardest was probably the person who edited it, because there were so many, hesitations and redos and throat clearings and sniffles. But I went in today and I figured, you know, today was the day to do like redos, and I figured, well, it's got to be at least a whole day. But apparently, it took like less than an hour to do all the redos. So whoever edited it must have done a brilliant job, because I know the job I did was far from perfect, but it sounds seamless, and and I think ultimately it's good that I did it. I think especially with nonfiction, having the author read something gives it an extra something.
Yeah, no, that's I love when the authors do the actual read.
Yeah.
You know,
and of course it's available as a digital, as a Kindle download. Yeah. Well, I'm supposed to mention too.
And then your paperback, it's going to come out.
Paperback, I think next fall.
Okay.
Very nice. Now,
the audio. I need to mention Apple, and what's the other big one? Audible. Apple and Audible.
Audible.
Of them. So Apple and Audible are the places to get your audiobooks.
Danny, your other books, the other books that you authored, like, you know, Superman on the Couch and, The Rough Guy did graphic novels. And what I find super interesting, and I haven't read it, but I want to pick this one up too, is How to Create Comics from Script to Print.
Yeah.
And that's something that everyone should be looking into. Are those books still offered for sale? Can you still purchase those?
Well, there are 3 books. There's one called, as you said, How to Create Comics from Script to Print, and companion DVD, How to Draw Comics from Script to Print.
Oh.
There's The Best of Right Now, which is, oddly enough, The Best of Right Now, and The Stanley Universe. Those are all 3 books that I did that sprung out of my work for Tomorrow's, or with Tomorrow's Publishing, and I recommend all their publications. John
they do great stuff.
Huh?
I said they do great stuff.
And of course that's where Alter Ego. So The Stanley Universe is a book that I did about 10 years ago when Stan turned 85, and we thought that was old. Roy Thomas and I each did tribute issues, Roy, Alter Ego, and me in Right Now. And we decided to put it together as a book, and we realized it was a little thin for a book. So I flew out to Stan's archives in Wyoming. There are hundreds. There were 100, now I think there are 200 files of Stan's memorabilia and archives and memos and sketches and email. I mean, it's a really that's right. And I found a lot of incredible stuff there. Interviews from the 60s that he did on New York radio. A woman named Hilda Mossy, who worked with Frederick Wortham, with him and Kirby in 1967. A lot of stuff I had transcribed and is in that Stanley Universe book. And The Best of Right Now is interviews, how-tos, nuts and bolts, articles on writing. The best of Right Now had 20 issues, including interviews with Stan and Will Eisner and Joe Quesada and Brian Bendis and people from all, J.M. DeMatteis, everybody. Um, and that was the best of. And then How to Create Comics was that came out of the first ever trade magazine crossover. Mike was doing Draw, and I was doing Right Now, and we had both worked on Darkhawk, of course, in the '90s. So we took. We created a crossover that was how to do a comic, and sort of you got to eavesdrop on me and Mike while we were plotting out and strategizing how to create a new character. And then once again, we put it together in a book with lots of bonus material about how to do coloring. There's tech stuff in it, which I have to admit is a little outdated. So, but I mean, the principles hold. But it really is pulling, I guess, sort of what I've come to specialize in is sort of pulling the curtain back to enhance people's understanding and appreciation. And I think it's a pretty good how-to book as well. It really tells you about what goes into making a comic, what the artist contributes, what the writer, what the editor contributes.
And you said that's still in print?
You can definitely get it digitally at tomorrows.com. That's TWOMORROWS.com. So they may have some back issues. Digitally, all that stuff is available. I'm not sure. I think most of it is out of print. And as usual, when you go to Amazon, there'll be like a copy for $3 and then a copy for $5,000. And you go, why is that copy worth $5,000?
Yeah.
What's that one worth $5,000?
Because it still has the cellophane on it.
Yes. But so it's definitely available. I would start with the Tomorrow's website to try to see if they have it digitally, and if not, just hunt around the usual outlets for the used versions. The Stanley, if you're interested in comics history. Stanley Universe is great. If you're interested in Stan, Marvel, pop culture history, then the Stanley Universe is really just a treasure trove.
That is available on Amazon.
I took a plane called the Vomit Comet, so you don't have to. At the University of Wyoming, and and that stuff is really and as far as my other two books, Disguised as Clark Kent and Superman on the Couch, Superman on the Couch went through 5 printings. So right now I'm looking for a home for both those books. I have the rights have reverted to me, and a lot of people ask me about them. So again, open to suggestions from you guys or your listeners or viewers. But hopefully in the next year or two, those will be out there too. Because I get a lot of, one nice thing about writing. I mean, it's nice enough. And you guys, Graham and Billy, this when people come up to you at conventions and say that something you did changed their life or meant so much to them. I mean, that's great. I have that extra thing from my books where people say, I used your book and now I have a doctorate. And I'm going, I don't have a doctorate. It's very nice to hear people say that they used something I wrote in their master's or doctoral thesis or something, or
Well, we have a Graham. Speaking of someone, how you inspired someone, Graham. I don't know if you know Danny that Graham Nolan is co-creator of Bane with Chuck Dixon.
Oh, that's right.
And Metal Movies and Brewski says, "Sup, Graham? My 4-month-old is named Bane."
Wow.
Wow.
Badass.
Wow.
And the kid's jacked.
The kid's
jacked. Don't mess with him.
And it's actually Graham's idea to name him Bane because I think
it was Chuck's.
Didn't Chuck want to name him Obadar? Wasn't that his original name?
Obadar?
It was Obadar. You said no. Bane is a good name.
No.
Let's try
it. You're changing
He's going to call himself when he grows up.
Poor Metal will be like, Obadar?
Oh my gosh! If I end up getting my,
But that kid's going to be, call me Phil.
I'm gonna name my Newfoundland Obadar now. If I can convince my wife to let me get him.
Our neighbor named their kid. Our friends named their son, who's a great kid, but he was heavily influenced by the Gladiator film. He named his son Maximus.
Oh wow!
And it's like, oh boy, that's not too much pressure on the kid. You know,
Just call himself Max, you know.
Yeah. Well, when the teacher reads, Maximus Jones, it's kind of. But I don't think too many kids know that movie. They just think it's a cool name. So I guess
Exactly.
Time heals old wounds, doesn't it?
There you go. So, is there anything else in the works? Anything you can talk about coming down the pike?
Well, Will Eisner Week is the big thing. So if anybody's interested, go to WillEisner.com or Danny at DannyFingeroth.com. I have a few projects I'm not ready to talk about, but as the year goes on, you will not be able to shut me up about them.
Would you be willing to come back, of course, for your new projects, but also if you have the time during Will Eisner Week to do a show,
I would love to do that.
Thank you. A
Maybe
celebration.
we can talk later this week if you have time. Maybe we can do a little a show dedicated to Eisner.
Okay. You obviously know where to find me. So.
Yeah. Well, we'll do it. I think we should do it during Will Eisner Week or leading up to it, the week
before. Leading up to it, maybe late February.
Yeah. That would be wonderful.
Excellent. Oh, that's great.
That'd be great. I appreciate that. And Graham, while we have you on, real quick, anything in the pike for you?
Yeah, stuff I still can't talk about.
All right, fantastic, everyone. You heard it first.
I was going to talk about this.
So I guess we can't talk about your return to Little Lulu.
That's just our trick to get back on the show another time.
I know what you're doing, Graham.
Yes, you do.
Yes, I do, and I can't wait because I'm playing a small part of it, but I can't wait to contribute.
Excellent.
Yeah, I really don't want to spill the beans on your, revival of Little Lulu. But well, whatever. You heard it here. No.
Yeah. Well, Chuck's writing it, so Little Lulu gets shot.
Yeah.
A hail of bullets.
It's a one shot.
That'd be awesome.
And she comes back as Dark Lulu.
Yeah.
Dark Lulu.
As Lane.
And that'd be written by Danny Fingeroth.
I got your lollipop right here.
Yeah. Strolls off on her tricycle. Guns blazing.
Thinking about that, I would get shot. I remember when after college, I started working at Macy's myself, and I was designing children's wear. It was a job, right? So I saw the ad, I'm like, yeah. And about 2 years later of doing this, making $22,000 a year or something like that, I submitted one of my drawings, one of my designs, and it literally was a bullet-riddled, slumped-over teddy bear. And he was just full of holes and bullets, bullet holes in the wall. And my boss said, "This scares me." And I said, "It scares me too. I think maybe it's time to move on."
It was honoring the Gulf War. All right, gentlemen. Well, we appreciate Danny having you on and Graham being a guest host tonight.
My pleasure. So DannyFingeroth.com, and I'm at Danny Fingeroth Twitter.
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, and please, Dan, we're looking forward to having you on next month when we have the Will Eisner tribute show.
Sounds great.
And Graham, of course, anytime you want to come on, buddy.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And the new computer's flawless, Graham.
It was worth every penny.
Worth every penny. We'll have to talk to Billy on the side note. Womp womp.
Womp womp womp.
Well, the Mac did good, Billy. The Mac did good. Look at that. Old Reliable came through. I don't know.
If I could turn the camera on and you can just see my little bat computer here, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Oh, you look great.
So
there you go.
I'll stick with my little guy here until Jay's going to come and fix it. So we're going to add a whole new motherboard and all that jazz.
Great.
So,
good.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for coming on. And everyone, we'll be back on Thursday at 9 p.m. with Jimmy Palmiotti to discuss his latest Kickstarter.
Very cool.
Creator-owned heroes.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Danny, you're fantastic. Graham, of course, you're always fantastic. Danny, this was really great having you on. Great luck with the audiobook. The book is a smash. It's an amazing read. It's wonderful. It's something every comic fan should have in their library.
Wednesday, mine will be delivered.
Oh, it's multiple displays of the book. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. And Graham, actually, really quick, because you're diving deep right in the book. I mean, not to put the pressure on you, but is it any good? Is it as good as he says?
It's very good. It's really great. One of the great takeaways from this book that I get from it is the things that people who work in this business, there's always highs and lows. And that's the great takeaway is that, Stan and all these guys, they have lots of work and then they got no work and the business is going to collapse and it still keeps going, and nowadays with comics and the sales that they're in, everybody's thinking, comics are coming to an end, it's all, but it's not. I mean, it's cyclical and this stuff keeps riding and you just got to ride it out,
Oh, we're all being rescued by Raina Telgemeier.
Yeah. And you're right, Graham. There's that great story of Amazing Fantasy 15. And how it literally changed the face of comics when Stan was ready to quit. And, Jones said, do one more,
I think that cover alone. I think the cover alone changed things.
FF1, but yeah, that was, yeah. And I think it was probably a conversation they had 100 times, as one does with one's wife.
Right?
Yeah.
What are you complaining about now? Shut up.
Yeah.
Do something.
When are you going to write what you want to write?
Quit bitching and just do it.
Right. I'm sorry, Danny. I'm sorry. I forgive me. Yeah, it was Fantastic Four 1 then that he was ready to.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling though that was more than one conversation. He might have encapsulated that to make it a good story, but I bet that was regular dinner time conversation at Lee House.
And the Amazing Fantasy was almost just like a throwaway idea, something he really didn't take too seriously, did he?
I think he took it more seriously than Goodman did, because I have a feeling those stories that became Spider-Man 1, which were both like short stories, those were probably in the works, but I think Goodman decided to pull the plug, because if you look at Amazing Fantasy 15. There's even a promotion for next issue. It says, you won't believe what we're going to see next issue.
That's true, yeah.
Okay.
That cover, too, I mean, that cover is iconic to me. I look at that cover, and to me, it's almost like it was ahead of its time. Like, covers weren't like that. Just Spider-Man on the cover there, it was kind of dark to me, Just this guy swinging in. It was just so different.
And that guy he's carrying with that fright look on his face.
Yeah, he's gonna drop him.
Like, is he I could just imagine a kid sitting on the rack. Is he saving him or is he about to eat him?
That guy is the distant cousin of the guy in Action Comics #1.
It's the great grandson of the guy from Action Comics #1. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Sins of the old man, sins of the father. If I may, real quick, you being the historian that you as well. How do you feel the difference between, say, Ditko's Spider-Man, his take, and then, of course, Romita coming in and stuff like that? How do you...
Look,
because we lost Steve a few years back, too, so recently.
They were both great. They both did a classic Spidey. I think just being the age that I am and that having, I didn't have Amazing Fantasy 15, but I had Spider-Man 1 where I bought off the stands.
Mm-hmm.
There was some, again, sort of part of what Stan did, which is he somehow made you believe that the Kirby characters and the Ditko characters lived in the same universe, when just like looking at them from a distance without reading the stories, those are not the same universe.
Yeah.
Stan was somehow able to bring those together. I love the Ditko stuff. I love the Romita stuff. They were different artists for different periods. I don't know if I feel like I have to choose between the two. Ditko designed the costume, the look and feel. He and Stan, whether they were loving or hating each other, put out these incredible idiosyncratic stories that still gave you your dose of superhero punching and hitting, but approached it in a way that we'd never seen before. Just the whole, I guess the peak of it being that Master Planner saga, which was, the one where Spidey lifts the giant scenery off himself.
Yeah.
That character, well, Spider-Man, Spider-Man really hit home. I write a lot about in the book about how for a lot of people of Stan and Steve's generation who couldn't afford to go to college or just weren't, even though they were smart, were not inclined academically, sort of high school was their kind of peak educational and socializing experience. And I think they both brought those ingredients to Spider-Man, where he became this kind of grim and gritty Archie Andrews almost. It was high school.
Oh, yeah.
It was this really intense take on high school, and I think they understood these really subtle things about Peter Parker, who I think had elements of both of them. Even when Steve was plotting, Stan was the guy who wrote the scripts and the dialogue and put the words in mouths and the copy on the covers and answered the letters pages. I think there was Peter Parker was not friendless. Peter Parker was the weirdo in a group that accepted him. And I think that's a big difference.
Yeah.
I mean, like in issue 2, Betty, and again, obviously these characters are just evolving, but he asks, I think Betty, he asks Liz Warren on a date, and even though she's allegedly Flash's girlfriend, she says, "Okay, Peter, I'll go out," right? I mean,
yeah.
They treat him as weird, they play tricks on him,
Yeah.
but he's not friendless. He's like the weird guy in a group, and I think that is a certain way that kids relate in high school.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of things like that those guys understood, and and then I think Romita brought something else. Ditko left, so it's not as if it was an automatic that it would change, but I think then it became more. Ditko, Romita's background. Well, of course, he had all that superhero stuff in the 50s. His most immediate background was drawing beautiful people, in love in the romance comics, and he brought that in. And, you could say it made Spider-Man have a little more mainstream look, but Romita was very intense in his way, too. In the beginning, he was copying cartoonists that these guys idolized, but I think it was different. I don't know if you could say, one was better or worse. We've lost Billy. And we lost me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was weird.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I can't see me or Billy.
Oh, neither can I. What happened?
Now we're back.
We just had a complete outage.
My mind is now in Billy's head, and his is in mine. So we look like we're us, but
I'm Graham Nolan. Woo! Sorry, Graham. You're stuck in my world now. There's a Stouffer's mac and cheese in the freezer for you.
See, now that's a funny April Fool's show. Is that someone can just I could just be mouthing the words and Danny could be talking, and I could tell stories of the '70s working for Marvel. When I was at Marvel in 1979,
Yeah, that was weird. YouTube got a notification that they lost our feed, and now they're sending me an error report. I can see that.
That's the important thing.
We lost New York.
We lost New York.
Says.
Jimmy T. Graham, wake up.
Jimmy T is here. Jimmy Tornes. Good to see you, Jimmy. Nile, we're planning to head up to go see Mr. Sinnott.
Yeah. Cool. Really?
You got to put that together.
We're going to do lunch with our little spin-off series of Crowdfunding Comics, Lunch with Legends. We're going to have take them out to lunch, sit with them, talk to them, record it, and post it.
Give him my best, and his son, too, if you see him.
Absolutely. So we have to put that together. I just have a comic book to finish, though. So we're going to have to talk about that, Nile. Scheduling.
Yeah, we'll get it locked in.
Yep.
So.
Well, that means you got to talk to Deb.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. That has nothing to do with me.
No, I'll go up on a Saturday. I got, you know what it's like with these funny books, right, Graham?
I do indeed.
You got to fit it. You got to draw them. You got to have them come out. You got to have them come out. Because everything that can go wrong will go wrong in production and, when it comes time to print,
Yeah.
So, got to try to fit all that in before for when everything goes wrong. This is the part we can control.
You have to cram the genius in advance.
Yes.
Exactly.
So, well, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. This is a pleasure.
You're wonderful. We can't wait to have you on next month for Will Eisner celebration. What year was Will born?
Will was born in 1917.
1917. Okay.
Yes. So if you just remember the movie, you'll then remember.
Yeah. No, I actually.
There we go.
So, well, thank you all, Nile. Well,
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much.
guys.
Danny, whenever you want to come on, if you got anything coming up, another book, if you ever decide to do another project, let us know. We'll have you back on. Graham, as you know as well, anything going down the road, you're always welcome on. Or if you know, see, we have a guest advertised that you would love to be a part of the show as a guest host. Again, just shoot me a message, and we will get it all arranged. So it's been a pleasure talking to everyone. Danny, my book arrived Wednesday. I can't wait to start reading it.
Again, Danny.
And all right, everyone, have a great
Billy,
night.
Graham, you take care, guys.
You too, everyone. And we'll see everyone Thursday night at 9 with Jimmy Palmiotti. Have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you Thursday.
Everyone have a great night. Thank you, guys.
Hey guys, thanks again for tuning into Crowdfunding Comics. We look forward to hanging out with all of our crowdfunding fans every time we go live. And don't forget to click the link below and subscribe to our channel. And there's a little bell, you may want to hit that too. This way you get all the great notifications when we go live and when we upload some awesome content. You want to follow us? Sure, go right ahead at Twitter at CrowdFundComics with an X, Instagram Crowdfunding Comics, and Facebook at Crowdfunding Comics. Till next time, crowdfunding fans, we'll see you soon.